If you remember a hack-and-slash action game starring a fan-favorite Marvel character with regenerative powers, then you played 2014's Deadpool, or was it 2009's Wolverine? Because despite being completely unrelated, these two games actually have a lot in common, which is why in this video we're going to compare both of them to see all the similarities, differences, and parallels. But first, let's set the scene. Released in 2009, X-Men Origins Wolverine was the first in a series of planned X-Men prequel movies. The movie was supposed to be 20th Century Fox's big tentpole for that year, so naturally the studio got Activision to develop a tie-in video game. Now there are a whole bunch of different versions of this game, which I will compare in a separate video, but the version we're going to be focusing on in this video is the Uncaged edition released for the 7th generation of consoles and PC. What sets this game apart is the copious amount of graphic violence aimed to give the player the true Wolverine experience, which seems to have worked because not only would this version end up being the fan favorite, it had better reviews than all the other ports and even the movie itself. Now, unlike X-Men Origins Wolverine, 2014's Deadpool was conceived from the ground up as a standalone game. It features characters, lore, and backstory from the comics, but the story itself, written by Marvel writer Daniel Way, was original to the game. This game also had a budget of $100 million, making it one of the more expensive games released at the time, which would end up being an ongoing joke in the plot itself. So how do both of these games compare? Well, both are action hack-and-slash games presented in a third-person view. Deadpool has a selection of bladed weapons while Wolverine has his claws. As with most games in this genre, both characters will have a heavy and a light attack. They're even mapped onto the same buttons if you're using a controller. In addition to the blades, Deadpool also has a selection of guns and rifles which add a third-person shooter element to his game. Logan is able to mount a turret from time to time, but his combat is mostly relegated to classic hack and slash. Something else that sets Deadpool apart is his ability to teleport short distances as part of the combat. Of course, Wolverine can't teleport, but he does have this handy lunge move which allows him to leap over great distances. Both games are also notorious for their graphic combat. I'm not going to focus too much on this aspect to avoid getting this video flagged, but needless to say, both games give Mortal Kombat a run for its money when it comes to all the various ways you can dispose of enemies. Both characters also take dynamic damage which slowly regenerates over time. Both games have a linear level-based structure which can be replayed from the main menu. Likewise, they both have similar level-up mechanics. Defeating enemies earns XP which increases your level, allowing you to make upgrades. In Deadpool's case, this applies to special moves, attributes, and weapons, while Wolverine can upgrade his health, claws, rage, and special moves. And speaking of which, both games have a special meter which allows the character to use those special moves when it's full. Both games also have a hint mechanic mapped onto the D-pad. In Wolverine's case, this is tied to his feral senses which allow him to see hidden objects and environmental clues. Like many hack-and-slash games, both Deadpool and Wolverine have their fair share of bosses. Deadpool's bosses are relevant to the story, rarely repeating, and are varied enough to make things interesting. On the other hand, Wolverine is filled with these generic, oversized bosses which you will have to take on again and again. Now, being released 5 years apart means that Deadpool has better visuals and graphics. However, the Uncaged edition isn't that far behind. After all, both games were available on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. Both games also rely on basic environmental puzzles to pad out the levels in between the combat. Wolverine's will mainly involve him pushing big objects, turning cogs, and climbing ropes, all using some basic button bashing. Deadpool uses the same gameplay mechanics but in more unconventional ways, like drinking beer, DJ electrocuting a villain, and squeezing Cable's chest. And speaking of Deadpool's trademark humor, let's compare the ways both games approach their plot and story. Now, X-Men Origins Wolverine is a tie-in game and uses the movie as a basis for its plot. We start in the jungle before having a time skip where Sabretooth beats up Wolverine, which causes him to join the Weapon X program. However, like most tie-in games, Wolverine pads out the story and expands it beyond the events of the film for the sake of the gameplay. For example, the Alkali Lake facility is broken up into several levels of Logan doing tasks for this lady, and then once he escapes, he spends a few more levels running around the Alaskan tundra. Now, the whole middle section of the game is a completely original plotline which has Logan help Mystique, who's not in the movie, rescue Will.i.am from Bolivar Trusk's research facility and take on a bunch of Sentinels in the process. And I mean, look, it's a really cool part of the game, especially this part where you fight the Sentinel as you fall down, but it's completely unrelated to the movie. In fact, they seem to be borrowing elements from the Days of Future Past storyline, which really messes up that movie's continuity. The game tries to tie this into the story by having a prologue and an epilogue cutscene bookending the game set in the future with Logan battling the Sentinels and Trusk's men. Now, the ending does end up circling back to the plot of the movie, with Logan taking on Deadpool in one final boss fight. There are a few jokes and light-hearted moments, but overall the game does follow the same somber tone as the movie. On the other hand, Deadpool applies its trademark humor and fourth wall breaking tone to the entire game. For starters, Deadpool is very much aware that he's in a video game. In fact, he's the one who lobbied to have the game made, and he continually calls the developers asking for more budget.
Let me remind you that my website got 15 million hits the weekend we announced.
This allows the game to parody and play with some established gameplay tropes like the tutorial, the game over sequence, and the low-budget retro indie levels. To me, this whole game has a vibe that's really reminiscent of Conker's Bad Fur Day for the Nintendo 64. Naturally, being a Deadpool story, the plot doesn't take itself too seriously. Wade's main objective is to stop Mr. Sinister from world domination, but it's mostly just an excuse to insert gags, character cameos, and a ton of Easter eggs like Gambit playing the synth.
Hey, isn't that Gambit? What the heck is he doing here?
Trying to muscle in on our action?
And I must say, the voiceovers for both games are really good. Deadpool is voiced by Nolan North in his game.
Well, here we are, the moment of truth. Can you believe it?
Whilst Wolverine is voiced by Hugh Jackman.
Cuckoo got screwed.
Now, another interesting parallel is that both characters actually make an appearance in each other's games. Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool was one of the highlights of the movie, so much so that it spawned an entire series. Now, in the Uncaged edition, Wade Wilson is present in a few of the earlier cutscenes, but he looks nothing like Reynolds. I guess they must have spent all the money on Hugh Jackman's likeness. However, the movie's version of Deadpool does show up at the end as the game's final boss. This fight takes place on top of the cooling tower and has Deadpool teleport, slash, and use the laser vision he borrowed from Cyclops. Now, the comic book version of Wolverine is also present in the Deadpool game. Wade joins Logan and the X-Men on their mission to stop Mr. Sinister, but ends up crashing the Blackbird and rendering them unconscious. Wolverine will then make an appearance at the end of the game when he and the other X-Men take on Mr. Sinister. But all of this is pretty much relegated to cutscenes apart from this one section where you can try to slap Wolverine awake for a good 3 minutes.
That's for being the worst wingman in bromance history.
Does this count as a boss fight? And so there we have it, 2014's Deadpool and 2009's X-Men Origins Wolverine. A tale of two unrelated games that actually ended up being a really good companion piece way before their cinematic crossover. And if you've only played one of them, I would definitely recommend trying the other. If you've already played both, then please let me know which is your favorite in the comments below, and keep an eye out for my full comparison of every version of X-Men Origins Wolverine. As always, thanks for watching. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and a big thanks to all my existing patrons. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.